Well, welcome to my book presentation here. As a matter of fact, I did publish this book in November 2010, so it's been around for quite some time. Well, welcome Andy and everybody else. You're just in time. And this book was my first book stemming from writings that I started between 2005 and 2009. And it stopped just before or just after the Obama election. So I talk about that. I talk about my impressions in Hong Kong. I talk about the usual things that poets write about: love, anger, injustice, what have you. But the very first poem that I wrote, and it's the first poem in the book, was one about my mother. Because it is a strange thing, to be halfway around the world and be far away from family, and far away especially from those who you're once the closest to. And so, let me start with reading that poem. And it's entitled Mama. The horned glasses, tortoise shell, bright and gleaming, were all that remained constant. A shuffle rather than stride, smooth cheeks caressed into distant lands' unknown plains, deep and wizened. Warm silica grin conceals the barbs in back, the varicose veins brightly garbed in uhuru kaftan. Of course, much has changed for the one whose baked cashew hue resembles mine. When I was a child, just before dark, she would read Baby Yemi and me ancient tales of the mighty sun, the endless earth, the brilliance of the sky. Now it is I who sends these tales in electronic blips to an old woman separated from I by the setting sun, an endless ocean, and the vastness of the sky. And it gives you a lot to think about. Now, of course, my mother objected, not strenuously, to be called an old woman. She said she was just a very mature lady, and, I concurred. But it's very interesting. I mean, now I have my wife here. Hi, Jane, wait for the crowd. And we have our, almost 2-year-old son, so I do have family. And I have extended family here, Seth, Selena, this young fellow here, yes, that's you, Andy Barker, and David, and also Mike, and, yes, Henrik, and Beverly. You see a disproportionate number of, the audience today are people who I had to convince to come. But I'm glad they came. And we do support each other, not just as friends and family, but as a poetic community. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But let me share another poem with you. And this one came when I first was here. Maybe I'd been 6 months in Hong Kong. So I taught at a Christian school in Yuen Long. So my predecessor just invited me, hey, do you want to come to church? I said, okay, sure. But it was one of those services that was one of the, not strangest, but saddest services, because apparently my second service in, we learned that one of the young members of the congregation had died very suddenly. And for some reason, I just felt compelled to write a poem about this. Later on, when this poem was showed to this boy's parents, they said, this guy doesn't even know our son, and he captured him just like that. How did he do that? And to this day, I'm not sure how I knew, but you can sense a feeling amongst people, especially when they miss somebody who's dear to them. And I guess I just captured what I observed. And so this one, and I dedicated it to the deceased, for Caleb Jordan. Strange irony indeed, when the beloved young pass suddenly, leaving old and corrupt like I to linger. The first awareness in the house of the Lord, my first day there, was of his death. Pain, crackling, torn, emotional, through hushed pews, weeping women, worn-faced pastor, eyes welled red storm, mouth grim. But brothers, it was not all bitter, this feeling that cascaded through the crowded hall. All that loved him, from every one of God's nations, began to reweave broken strands, tales warmed by lights and love of the beauty, strength, and sensual goodness of the man taken too soon, never forgotten. I saw, for next week's bulletin, a last picture, eyes deep and kind, carriage tall and lean, visage lit with the blessing of a divine power, compassionate, serene, at rest, wearing a endearing aw shucks grin. I think I might have to go on to something a little bit lighter hearted. Oh, but I'm going to have to take a look because that next one is no longer. Well, okay. This one, though, I like this one because in about a year in, I decided I needed a barber. Now, you're taking a look at me and say, well, what hair do you have that you would need a barber? But it's always nice in Japan. Literally, I had to get the clippers and cut it myself. But after a while, it is quite nice to go to somewhere else and for an inexpensive price have them, cut your hair for you. And there's a couple of barbershops, especially for black hair in and around town. Some in Hong Kong, a couple in Hong Kong Island, but one in particular that a friend brought me to right in Mirador Mansion, run funny enough by Nigerians, my own kinfolk, So, and all for the price of $50, and endless conversations about either football or politics, So it's a one-stop shop. But what they also did in that shop was they had a couple of ladies around to do the hair of the women who came in. Because what you find is a lot of the traders who buy mobile phones, clothes, and shoes coming in from various countries in Africa, coming to Chungking Mansion, Mirador Mansion, going through to China and coming back. Well, along the way, you need to get your hair done. And there was this one lady in particular, Marie, a Togolese lady, who was just expert, whether it was men's braids, women's hair, she was just a magician. And so I dedicated this one for her because I was just amazed at her art. And this is the title of the poem, Weaving. In an enclosed, grimy, somewhat worn corner of Chim Sha Choi, the UN of Kowloon, we await, second floor of the Mirador, second only to the Chungking, the infamous hub of the developing world into the Chinese Empire. The ineptly named mansions, with giant pastel hands for chairs, dacks, dark hair pieces, and brightly festooned boxes of plantain fufu for sale on the glass shelves. A ritual emerges, spun by Marie, the Togolese woman, curved and statuesque, whose skin shimmers, oil spill in the summer heat. As she unwinds brethren's frayed locks with the patience of an artisan in Afro-French flavor syllables, murmurs pleasantries and inquiries. begins to reform sleek rows of disciplined jet lattices on his crown. As I lounge and immerse myself with the lyrical lushness of Lauryn Hill on the screen overhead, conversations around peppered with piquant Akan, deep Ewe, peppery pidgin with the necessary English. A tiny hair shop, hidden from view as disparate black and brown strands are embraced by skillful hands and reshaped, an elegant tapestry through an art of weaving. Needless to say, I was impressed with what she could do with hair. At the same time, seeing her prices, I'm very glad that, all I needed was the Now, some of my other poems, and I had to choose carefully, because some are love poems, some are poems of anger. And this particular poem that I'm about to read next also talks about a migrant, but a migrant who was less fortunate, because it actually stems from a real story. My colleague, I'm a teacher by trade, and in my first school there were two of us, actually ended up being 3 foreign teachers, but 2 foreign teachers at first. And my colleague had hired a lady, just part-time, and her name was Juanita. And later when, my friend Nadine left to go back home, well, Juanita continued working part-time. But the problem was her status was, let's say, in doubt. And like many part-time helpers, she just moved around a bit, stayed in rooming houses, etc. Well, one day she became victim to a raid. And the ironic thing is, they weren't even looking for her, per se. It just happened there'd been a dispute between one of her roommates and girlfriend-boyfriend. And one of them decided to make an anonymous call to the police. So they went and grabbed all of them. But I thought to myself, a lot of these folks, here 10, 20, 25, 30 years. But no matter how long you've been, if you're a domestic helper, you just don't have any status or any right. And I thought, what is really the harm here, of letting people stay? So I wrote this about, Juanita's particular situation, but the situation of domestic helpers, and as we found in the news, we get worse and more horrific stories each day. But this one at the time was surprising enough, and I call this Deportee. 20 minutes too late at home, crowded, with 9 others just as teak brown, was the difference between scrubbing floors bare of dirt and a cell alive with its stench. Stomachs clench for those who have outstayed their usefulness. Nothing we can say for bitter reward for 11 years' service. Not one day that counted towards any permanent stay. When they finally release her, it will be a bitter homecoming indeed. The 200 every once a week for me was a cleaner house, for the 4 children, education, now stripped, futures mired back into frustration. The platitude of the benign employer was that she was cheerful, oh so dependable. But the Hong Kong government, in their infinite officialdom, with charts and tables and precise social value apparently in mind, deemed them all expendable. And, well, there is a good part to the story I told you before. Juanita managed to make it over to Macau, and as far as I know, she's still working there, because there is more demand, for work in Macau. Now this is a poem I particularly enjoy because it talks about the love of writing, the love of words, the love of playing around with words. And I've been writing poetry for a long time. I started when I was, well, technically, as the legend goes, I started at 10. I wrote a poem because I had a crush on a girl, and at the same time I was reading a Hardy Boys book, and somehow that all melded into a poem. But in all fairness, my grade 6 teacher did make everybody else write it out, so that was my first claim to fame. But I've been writing for a long time, and I don't think I'll ever stop because it's just a joy to write. Oh, by the way, if anybody's following, like I see you guys are, page 80 is where I'm going to next. There you go, bro. And this one is called Words on a Page. First time I remember climbing the stage was when words were alive and spoken lyrics the rage. Cacophony of flows, high jiving and intertwining, angular words, cutting airs, razor wit, moist, chewy syllables, so rich, so filling. They could have been Duncan Hines, not Duncan's lines, trying to slice and sweeten the elastic phrases that sought to stretch and expand the sycophantic cadence of the background band, laughing, crying, living, hustling, loving, dying, reprising life in voluminous webs through the patterns of glow silver aqua neon frayed denim. Tattered copies in back pockets with the bags of rough hemp slung on backs that silhouetted the crowd through the smoke-lit richness of the endless evening. But those endless evenings became faded etches. Some went obscure, others sought fame or a different name. A cosmic click, brush or rub, delete or alt, revise the main frame towards a calmer day. More sedate consumption, amidst quiet murmurs, brie slices, and chardonnays, where the full-blown New Jack swingers of verbs thigh deep in amorous nouns with fresh adjectives on display, eventually tame their wicked ways, living within margins to become words on a page. Yes, I enjoy that one too. Listen, guys, you can always ask for requests. Yes.
I'm curious to hear you read one which I thought was very text-based, and watching you perform your poetry adds a huge new layer for it for me. But this one in particular, Everything But the Girl.
Yes.
I've been there. But I was when I read it just seemed like such a text piece. I'd like to see how you would read that.
Yes, a little bit unrequited romance, at the beginning of my stay here. Okay. I don't have the same feeling anymore.
No, so that's resolved.
Jane wants to know what
Hey, listen.
What's your own effect?
I deny the allegations there.
Page 35.
Okay. Sorry. No can do. Thanks anyways. Was as conclusive in electronic script as a final sentence. Firm. Dismissive. Ultimate. Uninterested. Staring at the tiny screen. No comfort. Reading absence in the lit expanse that refuses to say anymore. How does that sound?
Yeah, very good. Better than my head.
Some of them I would agree. I think I'm also a different poet than I was back then. I mean, with experience, with exposure to my peers, with more performances, you do change as a poet. You never remain, if you want to be any sort of writer or poet, you never remain static. There's some that will definitely stand the test of time, but there's others which I read back and I say, okay, I can't even completely relate to this anymore because I'm not that same person and I don't have that same worldview. So, yeah, there will be some that I would say, okay, this is a little callow, okay, this was a little naive, okay, or never quite to that level of, oh, I can't believe I wrote that. Those are the ones that are usually in the rubbish bin instead of in the book. But I think you have to look at it in terms of process, right? This is just a path towards your development and, as a writer. And however puerile, childish, uninformed it might seem to you now, you have to remember this is what you were and this is your growth since then. So, you know what? Steps towards. That's the way I look at it.
I'm curious. Smoke Pearl. You chose that as your title. It's all
Yes.
your poems. Why did you choose it? And then I'd like to hear you read it.
Oh, okay. Well, for several reasons. Number one, Hong Kong is described, sometimes as a pearl or the pearl of the Orient. But if you take a look, I'm sure this is fog this time, but usually it tends to be a mixture of, everything that the Pearl River Delta has to offer us, with fog, yes. So, smoked pearl. And, in a sense, I myself, to be just slightly narcissistic, might be considered a smoked pearl myself, so, it's so it's a sort of a blend of images, as it were. And I just like this, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, funny enough, this was chosen by Jillian, we did discuss this, and it was of a Chinese artist looking at something Western, sort of a bridge between cultures, so that's how that came about. I think there's more of a description inside the jacket. But you wanted to hear Smoked Pearl, did you?
Yeah.
All right. It's slightly warm, this whirling smoked pearl, with its fragrant cacophony, sci-fi rushing limbs, irate horns, frying wok oil, high-pitched screams and opulence, Benz stars and LV straps in chaotic profusion, gorgeous from a distance, usually of the postcard kind, but a delicate and peculiarly sensitive bauble to handle. A humid patina of tropical dampness competes with a burnt haze, staining the luster of its face, continuously tumultuous as the fragrant pearls sheen. And I wonder how the hell, if at all, I add to its glow. You always wonder that, though, especially as a foreigner coming into a new place, and especially as somebody who's lived in a place for quite some time, how you actually contribute to where you're at, rather than just exist.
Do you consider yourself mostly a performance poet? How does it work creating a collection of poetry? How did you change your approach?
I think I've always been more of a performer than a writer, but if you want to get your messages across to people who are not necessarily privy to your performances, you have to strike a balance between being articulate on the page and, articulating that message through performance. And it is a difficult balancing act. Most poets will tell you that they know poets who are amazing to read, but a little bit lackluster to watch. And there are others who say, this person on stage is utterly amazing, but when I read this, it makes no sense to me. And I enjoy performing because I think it brings, as you said, certain nuances and certain texture and feeling to the poetry that one may not otherwise experience on the page. But again, if you want to reach a broader audience, you have to be able to balance those two tensions. Yeah, while I do prefer performing, it is necessary, for me to hone my craft to be articulate on the page as well. At night, especially, mist swooned black on the tower block. A queenly pagoda, feathered in battle-green sheaves and conquered girders, reminds of dreams, in solitude, aloof from the crumbling project blocks, nestled in brushes and brambles and thickets of chirps coos on a deep emerald hill, amongst all the bang canto whale clatter that clutters the neon-strewn cracked roads. A moment's blind, soft quietude before a descent to purgatory. As you can tell, I wasn't a fan of Yuen Long very much. I mean, I hear it's, gentrifying and all that, but it took some getting used to. So having that sort of oasis, that pagoda, was quite lovely. And, the longer one lives in Hong Kong, you find a lot of these quiet places in Hong Kong. I think the difficulty, with living in Hong Kong sometimes is when you're in the middle of that crush, either, going to work at whatever time in the morning, or, fighting the crowds coming back, or fighting the crowds in Causeway Bay or in Central or Tsim Sha Tsui. One takes a rather jaundiced view of life in Hong Kong until you go to small places like this or larger places like Sai Kung or the islands. So that was my inspiration. Pingshan Heritage Trail. Only an act of pragmatism keeps this journey of pre-Hong Kong alive. 10 frayed monuments in solemn succession, like those parchment-faced grandmas tottering gradually through impatient crowds. Little feeling from the bustle. Ignoring what's past, few here treasure relics without a price. Temples graying, village hills thick with moss, dusted curios, rusted paths, final memoriam of a forgotten age. Kids pass noisily, eyes intent on handheld Game Boys. As you can tell, this was a decade ago at least. I, the foreign, the only face searching in vain through newness for secrets in stone skulls and gaudy sages, somewhere in the emerald rust of copper shingles. The last stop, back to the station, to life. Leave the Pingshan Trail as an afterthought. Nestled in hills even I won't recall myself, given time and the usual uncaring. Since then, I found other sites in Hong Kong that were more pleasing and more interesting. That's a very good point, isn't it? When you come to a place, you come at it with fresh eyes, right? Whereas somebody who's lived amongst it all, they're like, oh, what? You think that's special? This is when Rita Dove came to make a presentation at the University of Hong Kong, and I put the precise date, the 17th of October 2006. And, this was an important meeting because here we are meeting a U.S. poet laureate, which is something significant. And being able to actually write a poem for her, she was tickled pink,
Asked for your autograph, didn't she?
Well, I asked for hers, But I digress. Here we go. Crown of lustrous crinkles exuding a soothing warmth, has her elegant, sinuous, slightly sibilant word sambad above, through the spaces between the sere walls of the lecture hall, waltzing tales of empires and libraries, merengues of bloodshed on cut cane, shredded sprigs of parsley, and an intense tango between an incensed bus driver and a quiet seamstress who refused to submit on a day not so long ago in Montgomery, Alabama. The crowd was wrapped in the motions of her fluttering fabric, especially us three, an unknown sister, Nyaka, and me, as she recalled the stumbles, the crashes, stubbed toes, tired steps, onerous hours, lost sleep, grit, sweat, and pain that devoured large slices of life itself, to recreate the effortless flow and leap and step and sway and laugh for joy, to keep from crying mesmeric patterns of her lyrical dance. Needless to say, I was very impressed with her work. It was, and
Any other questions or poems? I'm sorry.
you want the Hustler's Prayer? Oh, okay, honey. Let me just find it. No, it's interesting because, above all else, Hong Kong seems to be a city of hustlers. Now, hustler, of course, has a variety of meanings, but if you take it at its most basic, it's somebody who gets their grind on to survive, you know, does what they need to do to get over, to get by, or to even just get on. And it's interesting to watch how people do it, but I just decided to dedicate a little prayer all for them. Blessed be the almighty gain, even if it has brought naught but pains, slivers and shivers, trembling in the shame. Bright gold early morning, glad and hibiscus sweet, momentarily peels crimson heavy eyes, singed ivory grins that return grim, thoughts veering into dark hue deeps, after love already spilt and mourn for what was, just to survive. But we will, my beloveds, to thrive in the gritty city of the almighty game. And of course, yes, it has a secondary meaning too, and it's observing people in the nightlife, the street life, and you can do it, far more easily, I think, in Hong Kong, in a sense, than you can in other places where, like, there's literally, you could be in physical danger. Whereas you go to, let's say, Wan Chai, Lang Kwai Fong, where have you, you have to be looking for trouble, but you still see the people who are in the midst of struggling to survive, whether, they're selling themselves, selling drugs, selling, fake DVDs and whatnot. And not enough people think about them too. We tend to think of, your ordinary worker, or your professional, the day-to-day people who make Hong Kong run. But Hong Kong also runs by night as well. And in a sense, it never stops running. It's not entirely New York, the city that literally never sleeps, but Hong Kong does keep on running. I wrote this in the voice of Obama talking to a little kid who's, all excited that he won. I can't do Obama's voice, but,
You can try.
But I'll try his sentiment. Come here, my child, and listen. I want to tell you, kid, there is no can't. 'Cause tonight we did, by refusing to continue as we have been bid these last few troubled, difficult years. From here, our mission will be to heal division and make restitution to the empire of possibilities we have freed from the maelstrom unleashed by thoughtlessness and greed. Make a vow to strive, to succeed, to seek opportunity and not dwell on our need, not just wishing that change may come somehow, some way. My dear, change has been achieved this very day. So, I don't want to hear that you couldn't, you wouldn't, can't be bothered, or maybe you shouldn't, that you're not the captain of your soul, but a slave to your id. Don't tell me you didn't, for tonight we did. Make no mistake, in a day, a year, even a lifetime, we may never be rid of violence, hatred, conflict, or poverty, suffering, uncaring, shallowness, or hypocrisy, but never render hardship as an excuse or use inability as a convenient fib. I said some time ago, yes, we can. And tonight, oh yes, we did. A lot of my poet friends say, you're very topical. You're almost on top of, whatever political issue or what is going on. And I try to follow because I think it is important to historicize what goes on around us, or what we experience. And in a way, at least our contemporaries can relate to the things we write. One thing about, the way I see poetry is that it should be a living thing. It should be something that talks about things that, the ordinary person can relate to or be concerned about. And yeah, it should stand the test of time, because if people have to look up a dictionary or a Wikipedia to see what you're talking about, well, maybe you haven't quite achieved the objective you wanted, Good question. Because there are some poems where I get a sliver of an idea, I quickly write it down on a tissue or what have you, and then build it up as it goes along. And there's others that just come instantaneously. Within 5 minutes, it's complete. I think usually the more personal ones take a little longer to write rather than the topical poems, because the personal poems, it's something dear to you, but then you want to be, real with it. You want to not just, spit out something for the sake of, having a poem. You want to examine your own feelings and your ideas about those personal poems. Whereas, again, with the topical poems, it's fairly straightforward. These are the facts as you see them. These are the images that they conjure. Okay, then put it together. But yeah, definitely more personal poems take a little more time. It was rush hour, and I was on the main blue line on Hong Kong Island, the Shenzhen Island line. It was the usual crush of people trying to get on to the train. But then, at one point, there was this mother and child trying to get onto the train. And then the mother stops the child and says, it's okay, honey, we won't, try to push and shove. We'll just wait to get on the next one. And at the same time, there was this halo of fluorescent light that just hit them. I said, wow, that is so profound. That is so beautiful. I have to write something about it. And so, this is entitled simply, Mother and Child. As the voluminous serpent of the Shenzhen Island line skated its steel slither past the crush of Admiralty, throngs of Wan Chai, mobs of Causeway Bay towards the quieter groves of Central Library, Tin Hau Branch, I finally saw something good tonight. Previous stop, diminutive mother, seraph son, amidst the sullen, retiring mast, squeezed last mice into an overflowing maw when the jaw-like door snapped right at their heads. She took instant, feral fright. But in that moment of near mastication, she gained much more than that. With a rare, serene grace, she withdrew, regained a now empty place underneath the station's fluorescent light. And, as the serpent began to careen away in search of a more satisfying bite, a last glance had mother in immutable calm, holding her wide-eyed lad ever so tight. Thank you very much.